Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanny Show.
Senatus Populus Sargassa.
I'm sorry, did you just do a spell on me?
No, I just did Latin, you fool.
Well,
For the Senate and people of Sargassa,
okay.
to be precise.
I'm Shaun.
I'm Paul.
And today we are joined by the talented writer Sophie Burnham. Welcome, Sophie.
Hi, really happy to be here.
So Sophie is the author of the Ex Romana series, beginning with Sargassa, by the way. Although for me it looks backwards.
The Sidewise award-winning Sargassa.
I was getting to that, Paul. Good Lord. Yes, so it is a Sidewise award-winning, and also was, I believe, shortlisted for the Locust. And then there is a new book, which I don't have a physical to show, but is on the video, which is Blood Tide. There we go, which is red and not blue. So then we got blue, red, and I assume it's going to be a different color for that last one. Or
I couldn't tell you yet.
Yes, next 600 books in the series, maybe? No, that's a little bit much. Or is it? I don't know. It's up to you. Anyway, Blood Tide comes out October 14th, which might mean it's already out by the time this is available to you, but just barely. So that's out from DAW. But anyway, so yeah, it's very cool, and we're excited to talk about it.
We definitely are.
Oh, and there's an audiobook, just FYI. I think the audiobook for the second book is a few weeks. I think it's towards the end of October, by the way. But the audiobook for Sargassa is already out, and it's very good. Paul, that would be your turn.
Oh, I'm not looking at the script. That's why. So before we get into our top discussion with Sophie, not Thomas, a reminder to our listeners to please share your questions and comments with us at skiffyandfandy.com/listener suggestions, or to contact us on social media. If you aren't already, you can join us on Twitch for Shaun's Alphabet streams every Friday at 7 p.m. Central to be part of our live stream shows. This is a recorded one, but most of our shows are live streamed 7 p.m. Central on Twitch. You can also, please be sure to review and spread the word about our show. Help support us through our Patreon and be part of our Culture Cinema polls, live watches, and other special Patreon-only events on Discord.
All right, Sophie. So the big first question, tell us about the Ex Romana series. I guess how much you want to talk about Blood Tide is, I suppose, specifically up to you, but tell us about this milieu, this universe you've created.
Yeah, I'll give you the spoiler-free version, shall I? Essentially, the Ex Romana series takes place in an alternate universe than our own, but it takes place in the current modern day, in what we would call North America, but in the alternate universe is called Roma Sargassa. It's called that because the divergence point of this alternate universe is that the Roman Empire never collapsed, and instead continued on and morphed and took over about 2/3 of the world, including what we would call North America, what they would call Roma Sargassa. So within that context, we open with the assassination of the Imperial historian. This is not really a spoiler because it happens on page 1. I mean, so sorry for spoiling page 1. But this essentially sends 5 very, very different people's lives into a tailspin. His 2 children, who are of 2 different castes in this very stratified society, a fugitive who's already on the run from the law, a spy for a independence movement, and the deputy chief of police, who is very eager to prove himself. And that's the book.
So let's start with the big one, right? This is an alternate history, which you've already made clear, which might also explain why it got a Sideways award, because if I'm correct, that is specifically for alternate history works. And
yes, it is.
I know Paul's going to ask you questions about this, and so I'm going to ask the first one, and then Paul is going to ask you all the more specific ones that I don't understand because he's originally a Roman. Which is, what was the process like for like thinking through this much divergence? Because there's many centuries of divergence we can kind of play with here, and trying to like extrapolate out what a Roman society, basically thousands of years in its respective future would look like, or I guess 1,000 years or so.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You've kind of hit the nail right on the head about why I call myself a fake classicist. Because I did have to do quite a lot of research into the Roman Empire to understand the roots, but it's absolutely impossible to, extrapolate every single divergent point that would happen from, I basically decided just for my own sanity, I needed to figure out where that divergence point was. And I decided that Marcus Aurelius, rather than passing on the emperorship to his son, actually did the thing that was kind of the done thing at the time, which is adopt one of your generals who would be a really good emperor, and say, okay, you're my son now and you're the emperor. But from that moment, it's, like you said, it's thousands of years. It's impossible to figure out every tiny little divergence point. So I had to become really, really well-versed, in, what the culture was at that point. Then think a bit about all right, there's two things I had to do here. I had to think about how that would shift 1,000 years in a continent away. So we're in North America now. We don't have the same agriculture. We don't have the same building materials. We don't have the same textiles. That's automatically going to change just based on where you are. But then I got to play around a lot with the, the Latin. How would the language change? I ended up using a lot of female endings just out of speculation that maybe that's the way that the language would change. And then, also looking at the way that the social movements would change. And for that, I actually ended up not researching ancient Rome, but just doing a lot of research into just actual history as it happened, so that I could start to graft ideas of this history onto, actual modern day movements. And for that, honestly, I just listen to a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of really interesting history podcasts out there. And I think that those in particular are helpful for me because they really bring it to life in a way that just reading about it in a textbook doesn't. So I started researching a lot about the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords. They ended up being really strong inspiration for this group that's called the Sisters of the First, that are this, mutual aid group, and kind of skirting the law here and there, maybe tipping over a little bit. So that's basically what my research looked like.
All right, Paul. Bring your Roman self into it. Paul is an immortal, by the way. Yeah, he won't let you know this, but he was the Emperor Trajan in actuality.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know. I'm sorry that I messed with your timeline.
Well, I wanted to talk about the timeline. There's plenty of things to dig into. So I'm trying to avoid the big spoiler, which has been very difficult to actually, because I've been thinking about the second book, which I haven't got yet, and think about, well, how do I talk about the second book about discussing X? And X is hanging out there. Anyway, so tell me about the, because in the timeline you have a discontinuity, a Dark Ages. So tell me about how you decided to develop that as part of the historical narrative of the Sargassan universe.
Okay, let me figure out how to do this in a non-spoilery way.
Yeah, I know. I kind of challenged you here.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to answer it. So essentially, for those who haven't read it, in the timeline, we have, Roman history as we know it and then as we don't know it. And then a unspecified number of years ago, more than 800, but unspecified because no one really knows how long this Dark Age lasted, Rome lost contact with its client empires. So that includes Roma Sargassa and what we would call South America and Asia, and North Africa. Most of the African, just for context, most of the African continent and the Pacific Islands are not and have never been under Roman rule. But there was a breakdown in, law and order within Rome, and then communication, and everything went dark. And no one really knows how long that period lasted. But essentially what happened was that a lot of knowledge was lost during that period of time. And 800 years ago is when that reconciliation started to happen, that reconnection. And what I think the function that serves the most in the story is creating this really, really strong cultural value for knowledge, which is important because most of the action centers around this place called the Imperial Archives. And I think that in my imagination, I was definitely very inspired by the Library of Alexandria and just even the myth, the idea of like all the knowledge that we could have had that was lost in the burning of the Library of Alexandria, and all those things we won't ever know. So essentially, because of this Dark Age, this Imperial Archive was established in Luxana, which is the capital of Roma Sargassa, and an imperial historian was appointed to oversee that and basically be the curator of all of the empire's knowledge. And when I say empires, I mean empires plural. So essentially, there's knowledge extraction happening from South America, from Asia, from all of these places, and being brought to the Imperial Archives in Luxana. And that is the what's his name? That's the guy who's assassinated at the beginning.
Oh.
So the odd thing is that he doesn't actually hold any political cachet, which is kind of what starts this mystery of like, what do you get out of it?
Well, I find that interesting because you mentioned, right, that he doesn't have a lot of very specific political value in the same way as like a senator might, or other groups might. And I think it's really important in the book that you've written, this series, because so much of this story is about the sort of positions that people hold within this society and what they're allowed to do, what's given to them and what's not. I think there's one point in the first book where a character, I think it's Tair, who basically says like they were about to get 4 of the rights granted to them. I think before they had 4, and there were like 40 or something other rights granted once they become a citizen. So there's this heavily stratified society, and I thought that this was very well constructed and really complicated, and also very sad at times. And I guess I kind of want you to talk about sort of having so many perspectives from people at very different positions in this society, trying to all deal with this problem that is, there's some mystery that's being unsolved, and their role in that mystery is greatly affected by their station in society.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we hear this phrase, the personal is political. We hear that all the time. I think I just kind of ran with that. Like, all of my stories have to come from a deeply personal place. So if I am telling a political story, and that's what this is at its heart, we have to see the daily ramifications of that. And I think being able to have 2 people in the same scene together, having 2 vastly different experiences, I mean, that's fascinating to me, but that's also just real. That's the real world. I feel like with these sort of very stratified places in society, I was trying to make what already exists in real life maybe a little more obvious. I think that's the great thing about speculative fiction, is that it's a wonderful lens through which to make obvious certain things to people that maybe don't see them otherwise. Like, so for example, I think on first glance, it's really easy to look at, the Serva and Verna casts and say, oh, that's obviously, grown out of, uh, classical slavery. But actually, I was trying to model it more on the carceral system in America and the school to prison pipeline. Because in this world that I've created, way out of it, and for people who are just listening, I'm doing scare quotes, but if you work hard enough, right? But the system is still stacked against you for that to ever happen. But theoretically, it's there as a social, what's the word I'm looking for? It's there as as social services. Like, oh, you don't have anywhere to go? Come turn yourself in and we'll take care of you. We'll find you a place to rehabilitate yourself. So you'll notice that in this world, they don't have prisons. So just going back to this idea of, giving a voice to people in these, sorry, people, I wasn't joking up, I swear, but giving a voice to people who are in very different, strata of society, I think that it's really, really important in order to drive empathy and to, just make very clear that we're all living our own reality. It just maybe doesn't always look the same.
That brings me then to the way that you also treat Sela in this story, because there's a sort of opposite effect of her learning all of the ways that she's kind of blind to the realities of her social status and the impact she can have by things that she does with the freedom that she's allotted that can have ramifications for other groups that don't have as much freedom. There's a point in the first book, for example, where she basically gets past her guard that's supposed to be kind of watching her and sneaks away, and not at any point thinking in her mind, oh, me doing this, that means they failed at their job and they will be punished. And that there's an argument that happens over this. And I really liked how you did that throughout this book of just kind of peeling back the layers, making her kind of see you don't quite understand how much power you really exert, even when you don't mean to exert it. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the complexity of writing a character that's in this kind of a very complicated spot. She wants to do the right thing, but she doesn't understand how the system also makes it hard for her to even do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're all my favorite characters, obviously, but I have such a soft spot for her just because she's such a girl failure in so many ways. But the world has made her that. The world has put her in that position. And I think what was really fun for me was to write a character who, ideologically, from the word go, everyone is everyone on all sides is saying, oh, she's an idealist. We know from the beginning that she wants to fight the man and fix the system from the inside. But I think what's really important is to show that she can have those viewpoints and still be this sort of savior figure who doesn't actually see the people she's trying to allegedly fight for as people. And it's not until she understands them as people that she can actually affect change. So and I think that was also something that was in many ways very personal for me to write, as a white person in the world. That is a learning curve that I had to and am constantly, going through. I think that's something that many people can relate to, hopefully.
I think so. I can very much understand her character. I understand precisely why she has these sort of blinders on. And, I have great amount of sympathy for her, because once those blinders start getting torn away, it's very difficult to deal with the reality of that situation. So I think you did really, in my opinion, I thought this was one of the most subtly presented parts of the book, was her character and the arc of her character as she sort of sees her position in the world and understands all of the politics that kind of go into it, even if she doesn't want it there.
Yeah. She also, I think, presents what for me was the biggest not the biggest, but one of the most important questions that I was grappling with in this book, which is, can you affect change from inside of a system?
That's what I was
Or
going to
can you
wonder.
not?
Yeah. Especially, I know I'm going to bleed into book 2 here, Shaun. Like we see much more of the resistance against Roman rule. We get to see various characters react to the disaster that strikes and how she has to try to use her power to try to protect as many people as she can, and how people above her don't want her to do that. There's that really nice tension there. Like, well, why are you letting these people into the archives when we have
Yeah,
this
I mean, that was
catastrophe?
that was really fun to play with, also because I've just had this whole book of her realizing, like, oh, me throwing my power around doesn't always get me what I want. You can't always affect change from the inside. And then suddenly she's in a position of realizing, oh, but sometimes I can affect change with the power that I have. But if I do it in a way that is listening to the people I'm allied with.
Yeah, it's a real extension of that growth that from through the first book and into the second book, that she could come a bit into her own power as all the characters have to face a major disaster and have to put up or shut up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So continuing about the 5 characters. So I want to read a sentence I wrote in the review I'm writing of Blood Tide. Like Sargassa, Blood Tide is not just queer friendly, it's queer forward. Sargassa and Blood Tide are the queer forward alternate history / future history SF novels you may not have known you wanted, but are here for you. I was really struck that this, all jokes about Shaun joking on major changes and changes. I read a lot of history and alternate history and fantasy and whatnot that's tied to the Roman Empire. That's just part of my identity. So I've read a ton of stuff, but this is the most queer Roman, or even Roman, even Sargasso is not Roman alternate history that I've ever read. So what is the importance of, let's see, we have Sella, Ter, Theo, okay, Aaron, and well, Darius maybe not, but you have majority non-men and majority queer characters in U5, which is an audacious move. And I just wanted to
Also
talk
a
about the importance of
non-binary,
doing that. Well, also
a
non-binary in the case of Theo.
non-binary
Yes.
identity in here too. Yes.
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that lovely line in the review. This question is always so funny to me. Not the question itself, but when I think about how to answer it, because it was never an intentional thing. It's just, I'm queer, so that's just how I see the world. Like, honestly, I forget that straight people exist sometimes. But serious version of that answer. Queerness and gender variance is a threat to empire. It just is. Like, the gender binary was the European empire's greatest export that they brought to the rest of the world. It's a method of control, because once again, you're much like the caste system, you are slotting people in. You are husband, you are wife, you are man, you are woman, you are this, you are that, and you have certain expectations of how you'll live your life. And people who say, actually, that blueprint doesn't quite work for me, are such a threat. So to me, thematically, it just makes perfect sense that these, 5, maybe 4, but 5 people who are kind of messing with the empire's agenda would naturally be queer.
That makes perfect sense to me. Poor Darius. Darius felt to me a bit like Javert from Les Miserables, like chasing,
Yeah.
and not getting any respect or justice for it, and the second book wound up basically getting exiled for his sin. So I have a real sympathy for him and his play. I know he's kind of the antagonist because he's searching. He kind of is opposed to the other 4, but he's like the poor guy just can't catch a break.
Honestly, I also, like I said, I have such a soft spot for all of them, but I really do have a soft spot for Darius because, like everyone else, he's just playing the cards he's been dealt. He understands the world as it was given to him, and there's a very specific way he's supposed to operate in that, and it's not working for him very well.
Yeah. That just brings me back to wanting to kind of talk even more about the stratification in this system system, there is in the first book, for example, a character who is like literally on the verge of gaining their freedom from being in the sort of lowest caste, and then is basically beset upon by this empire's legal system for having the audacity to defend themselves. And it sort of really draws into stark reality the ways that these systems of power, sort of reinforce themselves to protect themselves from the very thing they claim to be offering, which is like justice and all of these sort of like vague ideas. Um, and you do this on a number of different levels. You have the sisters who are sort of constantly trying to push back, but they're even somewhat limited in what they can do. You obviously have the Revenants, who are like our secret terrorist organization. I put quotations around that because questions. And so I guess part of what I'm trying to ask here is, in sort of really going into those sort of legal ramifications and the legal, all of the ways the legal system is literally designed to punish people for having the audacity to be treated as human, I suppose. How was sort of building that into this world and building it into the story and writing these characters? What was the kind of process for developing that? I guess is the question I'm really asking.
Yeah, I mean, I'm such a pantser when I write. I don't know if I'm sure having done this podcast long enough, you've heard the term plotter versus pantser. Yeah,
Yeah.
like fly by the seat of my pants. So when I first started writing this, I didn't have, the technicalities, in mind. It's not like I created this world and then I wrote my characters into it. I'm always character first. They really guide me. And actually the very first scene I sort of saw in my mind's eye was that flashback scene on the beach between Sela and Tyr. And I knew that it was these two teenagers kind of in that first flush of that unspoken something, is this going to turn into something more? Is it not? And that for some reason, one of them was not supposed to be there. And then I just sort of poked and prodded and figured out of that why. And honestly, that was my process for most of the, most of those tensions between the organic relationships trying to happen and then the sort of legalese and stratification and man-made inorganic laws about like who can do what when, because we see the same thing with like Sela and her brother Aaron, right? And the tensions growing there. And I think that honestly it grew out of these like needs. It grew out of the need for conflict, but it also grew out of just, again, extensive, like, listening to history podcasts and understanding, understanding these structures that had been put in place and wondering what it actually would feel like to live your day-to-day within that.
Yeah, making them very explicit rather than the sort of implied rules
Yeah.
of society, which sometimes we have. Whereas in this, like, it's very firmly explicit. These are the rules, and you must follow them. And if you don't,
Yes.
bad things happen. Yeah.
And they used to be so explicit like that, back in the day. It's only recently that we started kind of pretending that they don't exist, but they do. They're not as harshly enforced in the moment to moment until they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I've always just had a bit of a fascination with like what it's like to try to just, hang out with your sister, be in love with your crush when you have these like oppressive rules telling you that you can't do that or you can do that, but it's conditional.
Yeah.
That I don't know. And I think honestly that tension is just such juicy fodder for, writing.
Oh, definitely, especially for like Sela and her brother, who are almost the same class, but not quite. It's like this very subtle difference.
No.
And then the second she becomes Imperial historian, spoiler alert, it's literally the beginning of the book. It's not really a spoiler, right?
It's the first page.
Yeah, it's like the first, basically like this next chapter or whatever, we know she's like anyway, right? But like suddenly this gulf opens between them. And it's sort of like that relationship becomes, it's sort of being pulled and strained because there are things that she can now do and demand that he has to listen to because of his status. And so how can you have family, I suppose, in these conditions when someone can exert power in a way that, like, most families, you're not really supposed to with adults. You're not meant
Yeah.
to exert power over your other family members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very different sort of society. I mean, she's the paterfamilias
Yeah.
once her father passes away, and that is so not only is she the imperial historian, she's the head of the family. And those are two points of power that she's been given that makes her very different than Aaron in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's again this way that the tools of empire kind of creep into your everyday, because the way that this society understands the microcosm of the familia is very importantly not just the family. It does encapsulate the family, but it's also all of the survey and Verne and freedmen that are, accountable to the paterfamilias. And it understands the familia as a microcosm of the empire. So they're kind of reenacting like empire made small within their own home.
Mm-hmm. And that is definitely very much in the ancient Roman tradition. The strong family means strong empire. I mean, so you just carried that forward into the modern day quite nicely and show it between Sela and Aaron very nicely. So I want to switch topics to geography. So this is also going to bleed into the second book. I wanted you to talk about designing Luxana as a polity and as a city literally on the edge of the water, and your inspirations in designing the city, especially what you put it through in the second book.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm from Rhode Island, born and raised. I grew up on the water. So to me, again, it's like I almost didn't even think about it initially. And part of why I didn't have to think about it is because it makes sense to have a capital city be a port city, right? So it, that just kind of naturally lent itself. But that geography of what I imagine to probably be, it's definitely the Eastern Seaboard, but probably somewhere between New England, New York area. I very specifically haven't specified where it is.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out from context. It's like, okay, is it Chesapeake Bay? Is it Long Island Sound? I can't tell.
I can't give you an answer. But regardless, I grew up like I know what those rocks look like. I know what they feel like. I know what it's like to, spend your childhood like picking along that shoreline. I know what, animals are around there. I know what the woods are like. So to me, it just felt very natural to set it there. And yeah, from there it grew out. Honestly, I think it grew out of just like the grand tradition of me reading, fantasy novels that have these great port cities like King's Landing, right? I'm like, okay, so we've got, we've got this impoverished part of the city, and we've got the port part of the city, and we've got kind of understanding the layout. But what I think made the most sense to me was having we have the Arboretum, which is this incredibly wealthy, luxurious neighborhood. And it's all the way to the north, almost, at the border of the city, of this walled city. And you start to get greenery. You start to get trees. You start to not be able to see your neighbors' houses. And that, that's how it is in every wealthy suburb or wealthy, area of a city, isn't it? You start to actually be able to breathe a little bit more. Whereas then you go down to the Third Ward and the Carnival, which is, quite literally crumbling into the ocean. You've got people shoulder to shoulder onto these jetties that are built out into the bay. So that to me felt like the most important part to like feel very viscerally was just how much you couldn't breathe down there.
Mm-hmm. I have a follow-up if you don't.
No, go for it. Yeah, no.
Okay. So then, by comparison, in Blood Tide, you expand the lens out. So tell me about. You said you're a pantser, not a plotter. So tell me about extending the view we see of the Sargassan continent that we see in Blood Tide, and basically scattering these characters mostly to the wind. I mean, Tear and Sella stay mostly in Sargassa, but you send characters way out to the Wild West. So tell me about that.
So I am a pantser, but I had built some of those cities or some of that geography into Sargassa. So when I got to Blood Tide, I was like, oh, this is so cool. I get to actually go to those places or talk about having been in those places. So we'd already talked about Fornia, which is roughly like Northern California, Arizona area, like the Badlands. And our characters spent quite a bit of time out in what is Arizona's Badlands, which was quite fun. Which honestly, that came about because I was on a road trip once and I broke down in Tisnaspas and spent a while there. And just started to get really inspired because it's a very, very intense place. But it's beautiful. But yeah, then I needed to pick out a few more places that that hadn't necessarily been mentioned. And so in thinking about the way that this empire works, I'd already established that it's predominantly large cities with agricultural villages surrounding it for, a couple dozen, maybe 100 miles in every direction, but for the most part, no one's there. And then you have the Imperial Road, which was really fun to play around with. The Imperial Road basically being the imperially sanctioned road that you go on. You still want to hire people to, protect you because you've got all sorts of danger. You definitely have the Inglets, who are the allegedly the native peoples of Sargassa. Allegedly. You have the very real, vaguely terrifying toxic gas that might creep up on you. It's lots of like stuff of nightmares that is very helpful in spreading rumors to get people to not stray off the road. But then what's fun, and again, I'm not going to give off spoilers, but just based on something we learn at the end of book 1, what was fun for me then in book 2 was deciding what of those rumors was real versus not. But yeah, then I had to pick out which of those great cities would exist, and geographically where it made sense. I got to have some fun naming them. I think that a few of them are really obvious what they are. A few of them are not so obvious, but they are based on real cities that exist. Yes.
I was trying to work it out.
Is again, fake classicist. I might be butchering the pronunciation of this, but as a Roman, you might be able to tell me what lapillum means. Lapillum? Lapillum?
Paul's the Roman. He should know this.
Yeah.
He's looking it up because he's forgotten more than he remembers.
I have forgotten one more. Right. Oh, right. Right. That's I mean, there's a couple things. It could be a tombstone, it's a jewel, it's also a pebble stone.
It's a pebble, which is a little rock.
I got
it. To be so clear, I don't expect anyone to get that. That was just like a little piece of joy while I was writing.
You put almost like a Roman pun in there.
It is a Roman pun. It is absolutely a Roman pun.
So
it makes sense. Give it to you.
I had to ask because we've now mentioned the pantsing thing twice, and in reading this book, I was kind of taken aback in a good way about the sort of level of detail, the way things are written in the book as you kind of describe different places, characters, backgrounds, histories. There's just a lot of detail for a book that is a decent chunk of length, but isn't like, 1,000-page brick, right? And so I'm kind of curious what the revision process kind of looks like for you as someone who defines themselves as a pantser. When you kind of go back, does a lot of this stuff sort of come out through the process and you're actually like cutting things out, or is it more like you write a more bare bones sort of version of it, and then you're kind of going back through and actually filling things in, or is there a different kind of, how do you get there? Is kind of my question.
Hmm.
It's a great question. Well, the interesting thing with the first book with Sargassa is that it actually got its start as a 60-page TV pilot because working as a screen time. Yeah. I wrote it as a spec script for my portfolio, because you need to be able to, if you have a meeting with someone, you need to be able to say, hey, read this. I have genre awareness. I know how to write this genre. So I had quite a few scripts like that, but then I wrote this and just thought, okay, this is something more. This is good. So this book was different, often when I write books, it is the bare bones aspect and then I pull it apart. With this, I had like 60 pages of deep detail, plus a script Bible. And I actually had to figure out how to truncate things because I had so much detail that I couldn't get into a book. When you have 60 pages, I don't know if you've ever seen like a screenplay written out, they're pretty bare bones. But that's basically like a 60-page outline of what ended up being the first 40 pages of the book. So there's a lot that I either had to lose entirely or I had to figure out how to make really, really, really tight. And so it was interesting then. I mean, it's been interesting writing book 2 now because sometimes I'll realize that thing that I had to lose because it didn't, it didn't have a place in book 1, I can use that now. So it's like I have this deep well of information that I'm constantly picking from, which is really cool, but also so not my usual process. So these books have been slightly different in that way.
I suppose super useful though, because you do have a massive well that you can pull from, and you don't have to feel bad now about things that you had to delete from your manuscript because you can bring it back.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what's funny though is I recently found like my very initial draft of that script, which the script went through several revisions, and then by the time I decided to make it an actual novel, then it went through even more revisions because I was, fundamentally shifting the medium. But I was reading through the very first draft and I realized the Ivaroa stone didn't exist in that draft.
Wow.
Several characters didn't exist, but that was the big one. That didn't even exist. And I didn't remember that I'd done that. I not listening, the Ivaroa stone is like, I mean, I can't really call it the MacGuffin because it is important, but it's a really central piece of the plot. It kind of kicks the entire plot in motion. So that was fascinating to me, realizing like how much it had been revised from the very, very inception.
That is fascinating. Okay. So then an adjacent question to this that I kind of wanted to ask, and I don't know if you'll have an answer to this, because as I'd mentioned, right, there's a lot of this rich detail, and so I was curious about the revision process and how you kind of get there. But also the way that you write, this detail I found incredibly engaging, which sometimes I don't have that experience when you're giving me like, let me describe these things and this kind of stuff. Sometimes I'm just kind of like, is that really important? And every time I felt, no, all these details are super important here. And my question is really about, I guess, like developing your writing style. You mentioned right before that you were doing screenplay work, which is very different narratively from a novel in terms of its structure. You wouldn't put massive amounts of description of stuff because, at least in my knowledge of reading scripts, there typically isn't a lot of description. And so, were there specific influences either from things that you were writing in other like screenwriting that affected how you wrote this novel, or other areas or specific writers, or kind of what was the bubble universe that this book kind of came out of, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is you're right that screenwriting is not a particularly like flowery medium. It is very visual. because you have to be envisioning, what's going to be on the screen. You have to be envisioning at least some sort of roadmap for the director. So for me, even though I couldn't get all of those visuals in a screenplay, it was a similar process of like thinking in terms of seeing it completely playing out in my mind that then ended up on the page. And I no matter what the project is, whether it's a book or a screenplay or, stage play, I always have like crazy Pinterest boards for everything. So I have a very solid sense of what the world looks like, which is very helpful. In terms of writers, though, I think this comes directly out of the Philip Pullman tradition, to be honest.
Oh.
I think that is one of my biggest influences.
Wow.
And I didn't even see that until my dad pointed it out. It's that his Dark Materials, Philip Pullman was one of my like biggest influences when I was a child. It was one of my favorite books growing up. And yeah, so when my dad pointed that out, I went back and I read it and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I see exactly what's going on here. So I think that that's probably one of my biggest influences in terms of writers. I'm trying to think of other descriptive writers, and I don't even know if it's writers who write descriptively who influence me, but writers who just completely pull me into their world. So I think of like N.K. Jemisin as well. People who just completely encapsulate, yeah. I should really have a better answer for this, honestly, but it's one of the first times I'm thinking about this in a while.
I think your answer's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
How about alternate history as a genre? So this is an award-winning alternate history novel. So what have you read or been influenced by other writers in the genre in writing this book, if any?
My biggest influence is honestly Kazuo Ishiguro, Never Let Me Go.
Interesting.
It's so different. It's so different, but it still has that, feeling of being so incredibly character first. It's not just about, or it's not, first and foremost about, okay, how does this society work? What is the alternate history? It's what about the people living in it? I think, I read that in high school and it just fundamentally changed me.
It should. That book is emotionally damaging.
It is. I read it recently and I was like, oh, I'm okay. And I got to the last page and just the waterworks came.
That's one, if you need a cry, you read that one, because that hits hard.
It does.
Yeah. It's an interesting choice, because I think if you'd asked most people who are interested in alternate history, that book wouldn't come up. Not because it's a bad book,
No.
but because yeah.
No.
It's such an interesting choice, though. Ooh.
Yeah.
There's gonna be some grad student that's gonna analyze the crap out of that one day. You know that.
Can't wait. They can come talk to me if they want to. I'm sending out that invitation now.
Oh, great.
Yeah, my interests in writing are so wide-ranging that I don't necessarily stick to one genre and let it influence the same genre, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm constantly, reading such amazing writing that's just finding its way into my work, no matter what the genre is. When I think about alternate history specifically, that's the first thing that comes to mind.
I think that's it's a good way of looking at writing as a thing that's going to influence you, because my concern a lot is if all you read is like one very narrow band, that you sort of miss out on all of the sort of the umbrella of literature or other forms of media that can sort of have an influence. I think like Alan Moore, I think it is, even said you should sometimes read what you think is bad writing, because you can learn even from that. I'm not saying that's necessarily the best, but
well, when I was learning how to be a screenwriter, my first job in LA was I did script coverage for the Slush Pile. So basically, I was reading all the scripts that were being sent Yeah, and I essentially had to write book reports on them to tell, the higher ups if it was worth their time to read. So I essentially had to analyze a lot of honestly really bad scripts, but it taught me so much about what not to do. And I feel the same way about, reading novels. I'm not going to name names because that'll get me in trouble, but I feel like I have so much to learn from reading books I don't find particularly good.
So I didn't catch what prompted you to go from taking this from a script to a novel. So when did you decide, said like, I want to make a novel out of this? I've written the
So
screenplay. Now I want to make this a novel and unpack it as you described.
yeah, so I wrote the 60-page pilot, and I knew I had something really special on my hands. Like, I'd written a lot of pilots that I'd been like, okay, that's done. I'll whip it out if I get a meeting. This I just kind of kept coming back to and like tweaking, and then I started sending it out. I was working in I was working as a freelance screenwriter at the time. So I'd started to, create some connections in TV houses. So I sent it out to not the execs, but their assistants. Through the people I was friends with. And not even saying, hey, can you show this to your boss? But just, I don't really understand the TV landscape right now in terms of what's getting picked up. Can you just tell me if this has legs? Because I feel like this is really good. And their responses universally were creatively, this is fantastic and exactly what people are looking for. But you're never going to get something that's science fiction fantasy that's not based on pre-existing IP greenlit. You're just not. Which sucked to hear, but then the funniest thing happened. We had a worldwide pandemic and I had a lot of time on my hands.
Well,
so I started making my own IP. And then very quickly the point of that became not to have a TV show, but to get this published because I completely fell in love with it. So it was a mercenary choice at first, and then it turned into a labor of love.
Yeah, that love definitely, I definitely feel you really have a real love of these characters and this world that you've created in the two novels so far. You could feel you really care about what you've built here with the language, with the characters, with the world building, with the history, with the redacted.
Mm-hmm.
The great redacted.
Yes, the great redacted.
Thank you so much. You're so kind.
Okay, so we got to wind down because you're getting close to that hour mark, and everyone has lives, and especially our guest.
Sounds fake, but okay.
Okay. I mean, you are in a master's program. You've probably got a 4,000-page paper to write, so.
That is, yeah. Not yet, but soon.
Soon.
I do have two group meetings for like huge projects tomorrow, so that'll be fun.
Oh, fun. Excellent. Well, first big question. We know we got Sargassa and Blood Tide. What are you working on next that you're allowed to tell us about?
Book 3. So I'm in the middle of drafting book 3. My deadline is very fast approaching. So theoretically, that should be out next October. These books move really fast. Other than that, I have something I'm not allowed to talk about, not because it's officially in the works yet, but it is with my agent and hopefully going on sub soon. But I'm really excited about it. I can tell you that it is fantasy. It's adult fantasy. Unlike Sargassa, which people for some reason keep putting as fantasy, it's fine. But this is adult fantasy, and it is once again very queer.
Cool.
Excellent.
And if folks would like to find you and your work, where would be the best places to go?
They could find me on Blue Sky at Sophie Burnham, or they could find me on Instagram at, it's O for Fox's sake, but I will spell that. It's OFORFOXSAKE. I got that in 2011 when I first got my Instagram, and it's too good to let go. They can also find me at my website, which is just sophieburnham.com.
And that's with an IE, just in case.
Yes.
There is a Y, Sophie Burnham. That is not the same person.
Not the same person.
Not the same person, although we have fallen into this habit now of getting people contacting us for the other person and then very kindly moving them along to the correct person. So we've never met, we've never talked, but we're both aware and we'll send you to the right person if you do get mixed up.
That's adorable.
That's
Aw.
very sweet. She's
Very nice.
88, I think. She's yeah. So, I feel like she's my spiritual grandma, even though I've never met her.
Given she does psychic readings.
This is true.
Yep. So very different author though. So i.e. So Sophie, thanks very much for coming on and talking to us about your work. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
For having me. This was really fun.
All right, folks. Well, this is the show. If you have read the books or you have any thoughts about this interview, obviously go to skiffingfanty@gmail.com, or if you're in our Patreon Discord, you can yell in the show discussion channel if you are so inclined. And don't forget to find us. We're on Blue Sky Threads, Mastodon, YouTube, a whole bunch of other places. Go to skiffingfanty.com/skiffythings and you'll find all those. And then every Friday, 7 p.m. Central, we're on Twitch at twitch.tv/alphabetstreams for the live show format. And so, yeah. And then obviously let people know about the show. I don't know, tell your friends, throw burned CDs of our show at people at street corners without committing a crime. Actually, maybe don't throw them at people, just like gently hand
Yeah,
them.
that'd be bad.
And then we have a Patreon, patreon.com/skiffingfanty. And speaking of that, we have a crap load of Patreon supporters that we are going to thank. And so here we go. Andrea the Alluring, Cameron the Chthonic, Caroline the Benevolent, Carrie the Divine, Chris the Candescent, Dan the Transient, Daniel the Cultured, David the Debonair, JC the Jocular, Jeff the Gracious, Joseph the Jovial, Juan the Junctional, KB the Kind, Karen the Kickass, Kat the Kinematic.
Matthew the Magnificent, Paul the Pious, I hear it's his birthday today, Phoebe the Eloquent, Robert the Riveting, Robin the Bold, Ryan the Resilient, Sarah A. the Sensational, Sarah E. the Sublime, Sarah O. the Rapturous, yes, we have 3 Sarahs, Scott the Gentleman, Stephen the Strange, Terry the Thorough, Tanya the Triumphant, Trish the Imperturbable, and Victor the Valiant.
All right. Well, thanks to all you supporter people. We really appreciate that. Me, SeanDuke.net, and just put /Duke things if you want to find my socials. And then Alphabet Streams is also my channel. So Wednesday, Sunday, 6 p.m. Central for me.
And you can find me in places that are not taken over by fascists or Imperial Romans at Prince Justin, PRINCEJVSTIN.
Okay, Paul, that was a little dark.
Well, we've been talking about a dark world here. Sargassa is not a shiny, happy place for most people.
Yeah, that's very true.
So it kind of bled through.
Yeah. Well, I'm supposed to make it happy when we end these shows because that is required in the bylaws. So I will make it happy. And that is to say that Paul, being the immortal Emperor Trajan, even though he won't admit it, part of the reason why there is no Roman Empire anymore controlling all of the world is, in fact, Paul subtly, working underneath it and pulling it apart one wood log at a time until finally the lack of wood led to the entire empire collapsing. And so
I turned it into a Jenga tower?
That's correct. The Roman Empire was a Jenga tower that you undid.
News to me.
So thank you for that. And on that note, awkward ending and scene. Or happy ending. Happy ending and scene.
Happy ending scene, not awkward. Happy.